Hey folks, it's Carl over at Sterling Health and Fitness, and thanks for tuning in today. We're coming at you today from New York City, and in fact we're in Manhattan right now to record our second podcast for the Ask the Expert series. Today, I feel very honored to have a special guest with me, Richey. How you doing, Rick?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thanks. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Great to have you here. Actually, it's good to be here in your
spot. Thanks for coming on my space, man.
I love it. It's great. So, Rick he has a master's degree in exercise science with a focus on
performance enhancement and injury prevention.
Injury prevention.
Yeah.
Thank you. He's also a licensed massage therapist. All right. He's a master trainer for National Academy of Sports Medicine. And he's also the owner of this incredible facility here, the Independent Training Spot, which I've seen so many posts online, and now I get to be here today, so it's really exciting for me. So, I'm really glad to have you here. And this is kind of an impromptu podcast, but he's here, I'm here, and he said yes. So I'm like, okay, I will take him up on this opportunity. So we're going to talk today about a specific topic. Why don't you just take it away?
All right. What I find to be interesting is the lack of assessment a lot of times in the fitness industry. And I think probably even more so, it's not the lack of assessment, but the lack of follow-up with that assessment, right? Yep. So people come into the gym and they say, all right, I'm going to take you through a workout, we're going to do an assessment. Mm-hmm. And it's all part of this field to help people, to help trainers sell training. Right? They go through and they do an overhead squat assessment, they might do a metabolic assessment, a VO2 max, and on and on and on. And then after it's over, let's go bench.
Right.
Exactly.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
All the time. Too much. And but it's interesting because at least we're getting assessment in the picture. But what do we do with it?
Right.
And I think that's really the big question. What do you do with it?
True. And
I don't really care what your sport is. There are people out there that do crazy sports. I'm a big fan of crazy sports. I did competitive and professional Muay Thai fighting. That's not smart. That's not a really brilliant
full
sport.
Contact, right?
Yeah, it's a full contact kickboxing.
Okay.
And that's not a smart sport. So who am I to judge somebody else for whatever stupid sports are out there that they may be doing? If you think about football, not a brilliant sport. There's a lot of potential to get banged up. Mm-hmm. But people do it. So now, how do I fit into this, right? So let's look at you as an athlete, or you as a weekend warrior, or just a day-to-day athlete. Let me find out about you in this assessment process.
So we're going to do
specific.
Right. You're going to find out the sport we're doing.
Yeah.
You're going to go through an assessment process, and then you're going to talk about.
And then we're going to talk about doing the appropriate warm-up, or I have to say the first time I heard the term movement prep was at Martin Verstegen's place out in Arizona, and I liked it so much because I've never really been a fan of the term warm-up. I get it, I know what it means, but there's nothing we're really technically trying to warm up. When people will say oh, but your muscles are cold. They're 98.6 degrees. You know what I mean? That's not really.
That's a good point. I like that.
That's not a cold
too.
muscle.
That's good. Yeah.
That's not a cold muscle. So what are you trying to really do? You're trying to warm it up? Because if you do that, then you sweat so that you stay about 98.6 degrees. So you need to really get warmer. What's the goal behind it? Well, the goal is not to be warmer. You could sit in a sauna and get warmer and not be safer or more effective at your sport.
Right.
So what do we do? We prep the body for movement.
Right. Okay. So we prep. So give me an example, Rick, of let's say two sports that are polar opposite, where the warm-ups would be completely different.
Okay. All right. So, let's talk about a form of fitness that I think anytime you do something and that's basically the only thing that you do, like if you do spin classes all the time, that's your sport. You know,
Okay.
if you do yoga, that's your sport. Listen, if fishing can be a sport, then yoga can be a sport, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right, and
Right.
it's active, and I don't know if you've done yoga before. It can be quite difficult to
Demanding.
do as well. Yeah. So let's look at yoga. And yoga is something that's generally we think as quite beneficial. But if you don't do a well-balanced yoga program, and you go into repetitive poses, and those repetitive poses, and you don't counterbalance it with other moves and poses, then you can put yourself at risk of injury. And a few years ago, there was an article in the New York Times about yoga and its correlation with injury and saying how it's injurious. Now, people blew up. They were yoga, like yoga. Yeah. That's another thing about attacking a sport of somebody is that's
Right.
theirs. That's all they do. Then they get really up in arms. But you have to look at some of and there's a right to be up in arms because it was kind of an attack on yoga without a clear delineation of what it was, right?
Right.
But the basis of it was you do too much repetitively. If it's one-on-one, you can pay more attention, but in a group class, you always put yourself more at risk.
Right.
And if you don't pay attention, then you are going to set your clients or your people up for injury. So,
Right.
and you can't. It's hard to do an assessment if you're doing a group class. So, and I'm a fan of group training because I'm a fan of just getting people moving.
Right.
But I love one-on-one training because that's where you get to really do your assessment. And if we're talking about trainers and doing assessments, then I think that people need to go through an assessment before they go into any sport, or regardless of what the sport they do, into yoga, Pilates, or some of these high-intensity courses and classes that are out there. Like, go and do a one-on-one session with a highly qualified trainer to find out what you need to do.
See, what I find is these repetitive motions can cause overactivity in certain areas. So, for example, I can tell you that my hip flexors are overactive, and I can tell you the reason why has to do a lot of the group fitness classes that I lead, where we're doing a lot of abdominal things, and I just do it too much. I need to lay off and watch them do it and monitor them, which I do, but they pretty much know what they're doing. They've been doing it with me for so long. So I end up thinking, yeah, I think I'll join in, but now, now I'm like, man, these things are tight. So I try to stretch them out, but
well, what I used to do when I taught group exercise classes a lot is I would always do the hardest part of the class with the class, so they know I'm there. You know,
Okay.
they know I
That's a
can
good
do
idea.
that,
I like
right?
that.
This is the hardest part, and I'm there with you. But when it's more of maybe not the most difficult, but then let's get the eyes out, just make sure, and you do this, and you learn cueing and stuff like that to a group.
right.
Some people need very specific cues,
Yeah.
as you know from
Yeah.
even group exercise.
Yeah, very. Whether actually, yeah, one-on-one or a group.
Yeah.
Some people need very specific.
And some people in the groups, like, you feel bad because you're like, you're gonna kill yourself, you know. So how do I they don't realize the cues for them, maybe.
Right.
You know, so you gotta hone in, and maybe that's where we pick up more clients as well sometimes.
So let's take something that's relatively popular. Let's talk about a form of exercise that's popular, or maybe a sport that's popular. You're going to go running.
Okay.
Do you have recommendations for runners as far as, do they stretch first? Do they warm up first? What would they do to prepare for a nice run? Maybe they're going out for 5 miles, let's say.
Right. All right. So when we talk about warming up, right? We talk about movement prep. So let's go back to our assessment. We can generalize. So let's do a generalized assessment for runners. Runners typically have very tight calves, go figure, right? Tight hip flexors as well. And sometimes they get really tight up top if they do really long distance running.
Right.
So around the neck and the upper back starts to get really tight. So let's address the immediate effects. I know that if you have tight calves, then we probably should address that somehow, right?
Exactly.
So what do we do? There's debate out there about should we stretch before we do exercise, and I'm a big fan of, if you are not doing a 1 rep max, yeah, static stretching is going to be absolutely fine. There's no data out there that really talks about long distance or I think that everything's about like, can you lift as much after you stretch for a 30-second power?
Okay.
So how does that correlate to a runner?
Right.
If you can run a dozen miles, then that's nowhere close to a 1 rep max.
Right.
So if your muscles are short, tight, and overactive, you're going to be doing some serious damage to that repetitive movement pattern.
Right.
So, and we get a lot of runners come in for rehab, and they go and see folks like Dr. Brooke Bush, right, and get rehabbed because of these overuse injuries. So I'm a big fan. Let's do some self-administered release techniques on your calves. Let's get those things stretched out.
Right.
And then you go to the hip flexors.
Tight.
Yeah, and it's difficult because you can't really do a self-administered release to your psoas because you would have to go through your abdominals and almost touch your spine.
Right.
Right? I mean, they're really deep through the belly. So if we were to go in and release your tight hip flexors, I wouldn't really say that that's something that you should do to yourself.
Right.
Only the hands of a qualified manual therapist should be able to do that. So let's find the other hip flexors, the TFL, the rectus femoris, which is a hip flexor. It's part of the quads, but it's a hip flexor.
Right.
Even your adductors can be hip flexors. So your anterior adductors flex the hip.
Right.
Yeah. So all those muscles would be good for self-administered release techniques like foam rolling and stuff like that. Stretch those bad boys out, and then let's activate the opposing muscle groups. So let's get the glutes active.
Yeah, which falls into that whole, when I did the corrective exercise credential, I guess you call it, where Brent was teaching. And I'll tell you, I have to, just as a side note here, corrective exercise is probably the most useful tool in my training.
Yeah.
Because knowing about corrective exercise and muscle imbalances, overactive, underactive, I don't even see how you can be a trainer and not get that knowledge if you use it. Or if you have the knowledge, if you don't use it, it seems crazy because you can be doing more harm than good.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Like, you have the ability to assess somebody and find out that information, and you have the information to address it.
Right.
Then it's really a disservice to people if you don't.
Completely. Thank you for saying that. That's a really good point. It would be a complete disservice to the client. Yeah. You can cause long-term damage, short-term damage, discomfort, pain. So going back to the running then, we are talking that stretching before we run is a good idea.
Yeah, but it depends on what you're doing it for. So, of course, when you have people that are running, they immediately do calves, which I'm assuming that every single runner needs that.
Yes.
Right?
And thank you for qualifying that. I actually meant to qualify that. Yeah, depending on what you're doing it for.
Yeah.
Right.
But then a lot of people immediately go to the hamstrings, and that's one of the questionable ones. Right? Because we get a lot of times, well, I feel tight in my hamstrings. But often, based on that assessment that we do in the beginning of the workout, I don't see a lot of necessarily tight hamstrings, statically or dynamically. It doesn't mean that they aren't tight. It simply means that maybe the hip flexors are tighter relatively than the hamstrings. Well, how do I know they're tighter relatively? Well, it depends on the position of your pelvis. So an anterior tilt, so somebody's butt is sticking out, then their hip flexors are tighter. Now, if somebody has a posterior tilt, they're tucked under like a scared dog, then I would say, yeah, you should probably stretch those hamstrings.
Right.
But if they're not, if they're in an anterior tilt and their backside's sticking out, then it's got to be the hip flexors that are addressed.
Makes sense. They'd be pulling it forward.
Yeah, they'd be pulling forward. Their hamstrings would be in a lengthened position.
Right.
So if the hamstrings are in a lengthened position, they are probably holding on for dear life. Right? So they're being stretched out the whole time. They're being stretched. And they're like, please, come back. Right? So we're trying to just let the hips come back down so the hamstrings can relax. But also, if the hip flexors are tight, then what does that do to the opposing muscle?
Right.
So if the opposing muscle to the hip flexor is your glute, and your glute's not firing appropriately, then your hamstrings are doing all the work that the glutes are not doing.
Got it.
So tell me again why your hamstrings feel tight.
Okay.
They're being stretched out and they have extra demand.
Right.
They've got a lot of work that the glutes should be doing. They're not doing it. The hamstrings are taking it.
That makes sense. That's a great example. So, well, Rick, I appreciate you being here today.
Oh, absolutely, man.
And
I appreciate it,
I know you have things you're going to be doing here with the competition going on today.
yeah, I've got an obstacle
Just really
course going
exciting.
on for some of the clients here.
So if you're ever looking for training and you're in the New York City and you're in Manhattan area, you need to go to the independent training spot.
28th and 5th.
All right, you're on Facebook.
I'm on
You have
Facebook.
a training spot page on
Yeah,
Facebook.
Independent Training Spot on Facebook, independenttrainingspot.com.
And we'll be rolling these. These are going to be scrolling links under the video
Oh,
for the
excellent.
duration. So we're going to make sure you can link over to Rick, find out about him, his facility. And again, thank you for being here.
You're
I
absolutely
appreciate it very
welcome.
much. Thank you for tuning in.
Get
We'll
those
be back-
warm-ups in.
Yeah, warm-ups are key. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back again real soon with another episode of Ask the Expert. Have a great day.